Good afternoon, everybody. Fantastic to have another full house full of developers, investors, manufacturers, occupiers, logistics providers, all the booming sectors in Vietnam real estate. Wonderful to have you all here and to see such a full house and so much enthusiasm. It does feel like this has come at a very timely moment. In a world of disruption and volatility, it's important for all of us to have our hands on quality, real-time data. And our teams go to huge amounts of effort to make sure that is what you receive. There's a lot of data sources out there. AI's been wonderful for scouring the internet. But what we're going to give you today and what Savills specialize in is giving you real data from the coalface. It's put together by our industrial agency teams in this case, who are doing deals on a day-to-day basis, best in class, the best in market, working together with our best in market research teams as well. So it's real data. I hope you appreciate the quality. A round of applause for our data teams, our research teams and our industrial teams. I look forward to catching up with more of you afterwards. I've spoken to many of you already, but I look forward to catching up and hearing what your own plans are for 2025 and beyond. Thank you very much for coming again. I'd like to welcome on stage John Campbell, your host today, and the man behind all the data. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Good afternoon. Thanks, Neil. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. It's a very impressive turnout. I'm sorry we don't have enough seats at the back. So it's good to see a lot of familiar faces and some new ones as well. We have developers, contractors, manufacturers, advisors, all here together. Most of us know each other, so it's a good chance to catch up as well after the event. So for those who haven't been to any of our white paper events before, I'll just give you a quick summary of how it works. We have the full report, which will be available to download tomorrow or perhaps tonight. And that report will have all the detail and all the sections I'm going to briefly cover today. And today's presentation will be a summary of some of the key figures and charts from the white paper. So if there's some aspect we don't touch on too much today, please download the report and have a look at that as well. That will be available in Vietnamese, English, and Mandarin. This year we called the report New Wave. We try and think of the concept every year. It seemed very fitting. Last year we had our concept was steady growth. On the back of the global slowdown, it was a pretty tough year for most real estate asset classes. But despite the challenges, especially in the first half of this year, in H2, there's been a massive turnaround in terms of inquiries, in terms of MOUs, lease contracts, deposits, far more activity in the market happening. And I think most of the developers today, especially the ready-built developers, are seeing that as well. So we're moving here to end of the year and coming into 2025, and we certainly hope we get to that level again. So 30 years we've seen Vietnam transition from the agricultural-based economy to now one of the, I would say, most popular manufacturing and industrial hubs in Southeast Asia. This chart here, just to show, is a good indication of that. We see Vietnam's latest forecast for GDP at about 6.2%, which is much better than the initial estimates a few months ago. So that's from the World Bank and Standard Chartered Bank. When you look at Vietnam, not just regionally, but compared to a lot of markets around the globe, from Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, you can see the growth is pretty impressive there to finish out the year. We can go to the next slide and have a look at the regional competitive prowess of Vietnam. So 6.2% versus Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines. You can see it's quite strong, just a bit ahead of the Philippines. So yes, last year wasn't the best year for GDP in Vietnam, but we're certainly looking to finish on a strong note this year and a better note next year as well. An important aspect we always have to talk about is the manufacturing salaries. It's not always about the labour costs, yet it does remain fundamental in a lot of the decision making for the low value to medium value industries. Vietnam now, we estimated 2024 is about $430 a month. So you can see just below that is Indonesia. One thing to consider, which we'll talk about in the next slides, is Vietnam construction costs and electricity costs are more competitive than that of Indonesia as well. As you can see here, I'll talk about the manufacturing PMI and the industrial production on the top left and right. So the left, we have the PMI. For pretty much most of the year, the production managers index was above the 50-point threshold. Later on, I'm going to show you a chart comparing that with last year, which was not so good, to say the least. So this year has been a massive upswing in terms of PMI and industrial production here as well. You can see versus China, Malaysia and Thailand that Vietnam has been no negative performance really except in February. So that's only one minus deduction in the whole year. Bottom left here we have the construction costs. So this is again where Vietnam is competitive against Indonesia as well and against Thailand and Malaysia. The factory now could be anywhere from $300 to $350, $400 depending on the province or depending on the piling that's involved. Electricity cost here for corporate use, 0.065. So again, there are rising rates from EVN, but still from a corporate use and manufacturing perspective, still remains quite attractive. Warehousing property costs. So this is from the report from Savills Global. So the guys from the UK who put all the research together from all the markets across the world. To sum up a rather detailed report is there's quite an emphasis on the nearshoring on the back of the China Plus One. There's markets like Mexico and Vietnam are clearly the beneficiaries of all of this China Plus One and nearshoring. And in terms of the warehousing costs, we're looking at about $5.5 to $5.6 in the major cities, which is actually quite impressive compared to most of the other markets, including emerging markets globally. So we're way down here somewhere. I think we're Ho Chi Minh City, right down there. So you can see on a scale of the warehousing costs globally from June of where exactly we stand. Moving on to exports, again, when we emphasize value-added exports as a driver of the economy in Vietnam, it can't be overstated enough. We need to look at the top goods for this year. So as usual, electronics and computers and parts is number one, followed by phones and their parts, and then by machinery and equipment, which are the usual top three. The usual top three markets is US, China, and EU as well. So this is, okay, we can move to this slide. Here gives us a better look at it. So now we can actually look at from 2019 to 2023, from computers, electronics, and telephones and the growth. So 2019, we look at the pre-pandemic level of the export of computers and electronics, and it's 58% higher last year. So we can clearly see an upward swing here from 2019 to 2020, showing that every year, including during the pandemic and upwards, that Vietnam is exporting more and more electronics. That is directly related to all of the manufacturing FDI projects in electronics that have come into the country in the last 4 or 5 years as well. So they're very tightly linked, and this resurging inflows is vital to keep pushing that up as well. Markets, US is clearly, by far the biggest. China and EU closely following then, and then the ASEAN region and Korea and Japan. So US exports, I think, was 58% as well, and that's compared with 2019. All of the free trade agreements, I won't go through all the 16 of them, but just to show you, it's a very important point when you look at other countries and how restricted some of the market access is. Vietnam has been very proactive in making sure it's integrated with the global economy through all of these free trade agreements, and even up until 2023, and this year there's more being negotiated. So Obviously, we know the key ones, the CPTPP, and of course the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, which we'll come to now. This is one that everyone has been keeping their eyes on. It's the most ambitious and the largest FTA Vietnam has entered into. I wanted to include a chart today just showing the Eurocham's latest survey that they did, basically talking to all of the European companies, including European manufacturers in Vietnam currently, and asking them, are they seeing tangible benefits at the moment, or do they expect to see benefits soon? Overall, it's been quite positive. You can see 27% in total have reported moderate to significant benefits that they're seeing. But we expect these numbers to be more in the future as the EV-FTA starts to fully pay its dividends. Until then, we're seeing a lot more manufacturers come here from Germany, Denmark, of course, with Lego. Then we have a lot of French manufacturing as well, and assembly moving here too. And a lot of these industries are either machinery and equipment all the way up to high value added products, whether pharmaceutical or biomedical or computers and electronics. This is the total FDI just from way back, the year I was born, right up until last month. So South Korea still the number one as of September 2024. Not too far behind now is Singapore, but in terms of number of projects, South Korea has by far the most as well. So that's nearly, I think, over 15,000 projects. We look at the FDI from this year, the first 9 months of the year. So as usual, manufacturing takes the biggest piece of the pie. 63% of all FDI in the first 9 months of the year was manufacturing. When we drill down into that data and we look at the manufacturing investments, we had $8.4 billion going into manufacturing. 5.4 of that was actually newly registered as well. In terms of region, about 60% or 59% was in the north, and then the remainder in the south and a small portion in central. Bà Rịa Vũng Tàu was the biggest receiver this year, which is mainly due to Hyosung's massive investment there. So you can see in terms of number of projects is very low in Bà Rịa Vũng Tàu. So it's kind of due to one or two big projects. Now, if you look at Bac Ninh, Bac Ning's in third place, but it has quite by far the most number of projects. So I hear there's over 120, 115 projects in Bac Ninh. So while it doesn't take the number one spot, there's a lot of activity happening there in the industrial parks. Okay, by country, Singapore, number one place. Some of these investments coming from China as well. Hong Kong and China then in third. In terms of number of projects, China had nearly 300 manufacturing projects from China. So, it's true what we're seeing in the media about all of the Chinese manufacturers. We can see it here by looking at the numbers. By far more than any other nationality in manufacturing this year. What industries are investing in manufacturing the first 9 months? Electronics, a bit hard to see here. I think this is about 35% of the total is in electronics. That's $3.2 billion. Electrical equipment followed with 9% of the total, and then pharmaceuticals in third place, followed by rubber and plastics. So number 1 and 2, pretty much on the high value added end of the spectrum. Okay, so who are the names? Who are the guys who are actually investing so far this year? Here you can see a few of them. The first table is the north and the second table is in the south. The top 5 in the north, Trina Solar Cell had a massive investment of $455 million. We've heard the Trina name a lot in the past few years and we've covered it in the white paper. So since 2021, they're continuously putting in new investments. This is part of their solar cell part of their business arm. And again, they're going up towards Thai Nguyen and Bac Ninh, where they have their other operations. Foxconn had 2 investments, 2 separate investments, one in Bac Ninh and one in Quang Ninh in the north. And I think when we look at the names here, we see solar electronics every year since 2021, we see in the top 5 for the north. The south, we see a bit more diversifications. We have some pharmaceutical, chemical, fabricated metals, but we have some electronic projects here as well. We have Tripod Corporation, who was a big investor in Bà Rịa Vũng Tàu, and one of the reasons, in addition to Hyosung, that Bà Rịa Vũng Tàu has received the most manufacturing investment in the first 9 months. We have other companies there, Tosho Corporation from Japan and Innovation Tech as well in Binzong. I won't spend too much here on the historical data. You can just have a quick look of the total manufacturing FDI against the total FDI over the past 6-7 years. And then on the right here, you can see the number of projects in terms of manufacturing, which are the new manufacturing projects, which are the existing ones contributing capital, and which ones are doing the capital contributions. Every year in yellow, most of the number of projects are new projects, which is very promising to see all the new market entrants every year. So what are the property deals that have been done? So this year we wanted to do something a bit different to other years. We always drill down heavily on the manufacturing FDI to get to the root of it. This year as well, we wanted to measure every manufacturing FDI investment, which was 844, and we wanted to measure each of them, how many were factory deals and how many were land deals. And this is the result. So nationally, if you look at the investment capital, by far the bigger and most of it went to the land. So 85% of the manufacturing investment capital was due to land deals. However, when you look at the number of projects, it's a bit more evened out. So 53% were land and about 47% were factory. So the number of factory deals is still steadily increasing. And I think that goes to show all these new ready-built factories in the market from the developers and a lot more of the supply chains that are following. They need to be accommodated, they need places to go, and many of them, they don't need over 20 to 30 or 40,000 square meter. They need as small as 5 to 10,000. So that's why we're seeing an increase in the number of these deals. If we want to break down the North Economic Zone, the NEZ and the South Economic Zone, 57% of the deals in the North were land deals and 43% were factory. But in the South, it's a bit different. Most of the deals were factory deals at 55% and 45% were land deals. So I mentioned earlier I wanted to look at the manufacturing PMI versus last year compared to this year. So you can see 2023 versus 2024, and most of last year was below the 50-point threshold, which is the line in red, which indicates quite poor performance for a lot of 2023. But most of this year, pretty much all of this year, aside from March and September due to the typhoon, we've seen positive growth above the 50-point threshold. And even on the back of the typhoon, most of the temporary disruption that's happened due to the storm, the manufacturers are still showing that in the next month or two that things will be picking up, and they're quite confident in that. So industrial production tells a similar story. I would say just 2 months of last year had negative industrial production, but pretty much every year, every month except February has reported positive industrial production growth. So September we had 10.8%, which was up from 8.4 the month before. So overall, when you look at the actual manufacturing that's happening right now in the country, the numbers are significantly better than 2023. I'm going to move on to the property. So in the white paper itself, you get much more detail about the property, but just to highlight a couple of the key figures for the North Economic Zone first. So we have about 73, 75 industrial parks we analysed across 6 key provinces in the North Economic Zone. So right now we have about 12 to 13,000 hectares of leasable area that we analysed. That's increased about 12% from last year. So there's new supply coming live, especially around Haizung and Hanam as well. Occupancy overall is similar to last year at 78%, and the land lease is about $132 a square meter, which is similar to last year's number actually, not a massive movement. I'm going to go to the ready-built supply. So we're sticking in the North Economic Zone here. We're going to look at the ready-built. So ready-built, the area we measured was 4.5 million square meters of GFA space, rentable area. So that's about 30% of all of the ready-built supply in the country. We split ready-built into ready-built factory and ready-built warehouse. So about 64% was factory and the remainder was ready-built warehouse. Occupancy is quite similar to the land occupancy at 80%, and the rent is up to $5, which is I think up about 8% from 2023's figures. So a slight increase in the ready-built rents. The highest you can see there is Bac Ninh. Haiphong is above 5 now as well. Just to emphasize as well, these are the averages of the asking rents as well. We'll have a look in the south. So you have some of the key developers, both IP developers and the factory and warehouse developers. We have about 25,000 square meter leasable area in the 6 provinces. That's about 130 industrial parks that we covered. And the occupancy is quite a bit more than the south. We're touching 90% occupancy in these provinces now. So I think most people here who are familiar with the industry know that it's getting quite challenging in Binh Duong and Dong Nai to find land now. Long An does have some land available, but still, it's certainly not that easy. We're waiting for a lot of new exciting projects to come. We have Long Duc 3, for example, in Dong Nai. We have Pro Daisy, who have just gone live in Long An. So it's very important we keep seeing these new big IP projects come to the market to provide supply. Price, $183 to $185 a square meter. So that's up from $175 last year. So there's more of an increase in the land price in the south compared to the north, compared with last year. Ready built. So the split between ready-built factory and ready-built warehouse is much more even. So it's about 51% factory and warehouse. So warehouse is overtaken in terms of supply, but it's more or less the same there. I will say though that the occupancy at the moment in the ready-built factories is quite a bit higher than the occupancies in the ready-built warehouse. A lot of the warehouse projects we're seeing at the moment in the south, there's a bit more of a reliance on anchor tenants or large tenants to lease a large portion of the project, which is great for the developer, but also can be challenging in terms of negotiating and giving lower rent and incentives to get the big guys to rent your project. With the ready-built factory developers, we see they have much more diversification of tenants, anywhere from 2,000 square meter tenant to 10, 15,000 square meter. They have a bit more choice. From the agency perspective on the ground at Savills, most of our inquiries right now, I would say it would be 65% for factory space. Rent, quite a bit cheaper overall than the north, which is interesting to see, about $4.5 a square meter per month. And the occupancy is very similar at 80%. We're going to move on to logistics and e-commerce. I think most people might have seen the LPI, the World Bank Logistic Performance Index. So this is just a table to show you from 2007 all the way up to now. So there's still a lot of room for improvement in Vietnam logistics, including the infrastructure, improving the cumbersome administrative procedures in customs, emphasizing, digitizing the industry as a whole, making it less autonomous. These are all factors that need to improve, and it's a very fragmented market. But in saying that, when you look at the LPI index, being in 43rd place is, quite a lot better than where we were a few years ago, since 2007. So 3.3 points now last year, so slowly improving. When we look at the digital economy, so we're looking at expecting $45 billion by 2025. By 2030, the study we're referring to here from CIMIGO and the Government Statistics Office are saying between 90 billion to 200 billion by 2030, which I think 200 billion can be a bit ambitious, but still it goes to show growth on every year, which is very important. And when we look at the amount of intranet usage among the population in Vietnam, it's not that much of a surprise. Quick look at the e-commerce. So by 2025, it's still the fastest growing market in Southeast Asia in terms of e-commerce. Over 80% of the population now using the internet in the country to shop online. And we'll come to TikTok Shop in a moment, but we are seeing the amalgamation of the social media with e-commerce platforms now, which is one of the most popular ways to sell nowadays. So we'll have a look here at some of the major platforms. We know that Shopee always has the biggest piece of the pie, still has a big market share, over 50%. But TikTok Shop is actually the fastest growing, and it's only been in Vietnam since, I think, July 2022, so just over 2 years. And the growth of TikTok Shop is, quite significant now. We do expect them to take a bigger piece of this every year going forward. And we're also expecting some new Chinese players and competitors to come to the market in e-commerce. Temu was also announced moving to Vietnam, and we have Taobao, who isn't in Vietnam, but they're delivering and shipping to Vietnam addresses now. So that's going to put more pressure on the domestic e-commerce platforms like Tiki in Vietnam, not only competing with Shopee, but also a lot of the new Chinese entrants as well. This is from Metric Vietnam. They do a lot of good study on the retail numbers in Vietnam, especially e-commerce. So what we see here is the total revenue in 9 months this year, reaching $9.5 billion there, which is up 38%. So again, TikTok Shop and Shopee recorded the best growth. And the low price segment is where we see the most sales. So over half of the e-commerce sales in the first 9 months of this year were for products that were under $8. So beauty care, fashion were being at the top there in terms of the products being sold. The New Era, which is the team that we talk about in the paper, we have a quote here from Troy. We talked about the traditional manufacturing changing in Vietnam from the dirt floor manufacturing and low-cost labor to the high value-added labor and production. And that is what we're in the middle of. Vietnam has been in this transition for quite a few years already. So what are the sectors and segments that are showing this growth and this era? So we talk about semiconductors, electrical vehicles, solar, of course, and data centers, which has a lot of interest, but still has a big question mark. So we can dig in and have a brief look here at some of these sectors. I'm going to start with the semiconductors. A lot of people here probably attended Vietnam's first semiconductor conference like a month ago, which was important for the country because a lot of the big players there, like Texas Instruments and all these guys and Intel, were present at that exhibition. This is the first time they've had such an exhibition here. I just wanted to point out something in a table here, that there's actually a lot of companies who are in semiconductors in Vietnam for a long time. It's not necessarily new in Vietnam, but getting these new investments and getting more of these semiconductors is becoming very important. Coherent is a good example of that from the US, who's just invested in Dong Nai this year. But then you have other guys who've been here since 2003, 2004, who have been, and Intel, for example, I think they produce 80% of their fourth generation CPU chips in Vietnam. And some of these guys have been here quite a while. The government has, put some plans and setting some initiatives in motion to achieve the best results possible with the semiconductors. So from 2024 to 2050, a quick summary of some of the initiatives they're trying to go through it is 2030 to 2040, increasing the self-sufficiency of Vietnam, targeting 200 design firms, 2 factories rather, and over 100,000 skilled workforce of engineers focusing and working specifically in Vietnam's domestic semiconductor industry. And 2040 to 2050, establishing Vietnam as a global leader in this space. So it's not going to happen overnight, right? It's a long-term plan, but given we have a lot of the big foreign guys here already producing semiconductor chips and more coming, there's no reason why domestic firms in Vietnam cannot be reaching these targets in the next 20, 25 years and improving the level of skilled supply to be a self-sufficient semiconductor hub. Solar and electric vehicles. Solar is very interesting. 2021, 2022, and last year, the top 5 and top 10 manufacturing investments in the north of Vietnam, a lot of them are solar, all right? Like I mentioned, Trina Solar earlier, JA Solar, all of these guys. The first 9 months of this year, we're still seeing some solar investments. The biggest one was Trina Solar Cell. The ones after that are quite, I won't say small, but not on the same scale, 30 million and below, which is a bit different to the previous years. There is quite a bit of media coverage as well on what's going to happen with these preliminary duties from the US Department of Commerce. They are looking closely at tariffs, mostly on the Chinese firms, up to 290, 300%. But this hasn't gone through yet, but there's also them looking at putting tariffs on other countries like Thailand, Malaysia and Vietnam, which could be up to 2.9%. So nowhere near the level of tariffs that China is being hit with, but it can affect some of the Chinese solar manufacturers who are already in Vietnam, or the Chinese solar manufacturers who plan to move to Vietnam. So this will influence their decision making in the next couple of years as well. Electrical vehicles, we're definitely in an early stage, so that's why I say new era, but there is indication of a lot of potential in this space. VinFast is obviously the biggest domestic player in this space in terms of production, but I wanted to include some numbers from a chart actually by KPMG's latest survey driven by voltage, whereas they asked a lot of the vehicle users what would they like for their next vehicle by engine type, and I think it was over 36% were saying full EV. But what's interesting about 36% is most of them were millennial and Gen Z. A lot of the younger crowd were very open to getting full EV or even hybrid as well. This is again something that we're looking for, and the Vietnam Automobile Manufacturing Association, they think that it'll reach 1 million electrical vehicles by 2028 and 3.5 million by 2040. So we shall see. There's a lot of considerations involved. Besides VinFast, who else is installing the charging stations, the charging infrastructure? Other considerations in the decision-making process include the vehicle features, the ownership policies, pricing, of course, and so this is the aspects that will need to become very clear to increase the number of young people and the population overall who adopt either hybrid or full electrical vehicles in the future. I'm going to finish up on data centers. There's a lot we could show on data centers. I just want to show one chart showing the share by the local telcos in Vietnam at the moment. Viettel, the biggest with the 21%. Now, keep in mind that Viettel have also opened the biggest data center in Vietnam by far in Hoa Lac High Tech Park, which is a capacity of 30 megawatts. So when that's in operation and reaching capacity, Viettel will have much more of the market share. But for now, they're still more or less the biggest player in Vietnam. VNPT are following in terms of distribution. We have a lot of interest in the last couple of years as an agency. We talked to all of the big data center operators and investors. They all want to know about Vietnam. They're all asking about it. They're waiting for the signal from a lot of the hyperscalers to say go. A lot of these guys have already entered Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines. So we're waiting to see what happens in Vietnam. And, this year there was some positive news. We had STT Telecom from Singapore announce a joint venture with VNG. That shows that it is possible for a foreign data center company to enter a successful JV in Vietnam in the data center space. NTT from Japan have done it as well, but it's still not fully clear. And this is, hoping that 2025 will make that easier. We had the amendments on the telecommunications law, which went into effect in July, but a lot of the parts that are related to data centers will not be in effect until January 2025. So my prediction is 2025 we will see more than just NTT and STT in the market as foreign data center operators. We're expecting more will enter the market soon, and yes, we shall see. So I'm going to end it there. We have a lot more detail about all of these new era sectors like data centers, electrical vehicles in the full report. It's hard to cover everything in a report in 20-25 minutes. So we're going to finish up, and please, I do urge you to download it and have a read of it. And of course, any questions you have today, I'm going to remain available here to answer. So thank you very much.